Debbie Wagner. I teach physical education at Layton Elementary.
I'm Jennifer Mashlatan. I'm a 5th grade teacher at Manetto Elementary.
I'm Jennifer Spotak. I teach K-6 AIS Math at Manetto Elementary.
And I'm Connie Wadsworth. I teach 6th grade at Manetto Elementary.
We'd like to begin by transitioning you from your busy day with an inclusive activity. At this time, if you're an elementary teacher, could you please stand for us? Take a look around. Quite a few. And you may have a seat. Any secondary teachers in the room this evening? About split. Thank you. You may have a seat. Administrators? I see quite a few back there. Welcome. Thank you. You may have a seat. And finally, are there any others that we didn't mention that are educator supporters that are in this room? Please stand. We want to include you too. Thank you all for participating in this inclusive activity. Throughout our presentation, we will be posting simple tools that we call brain brighteners on our rainbow behind us. They're ways to engage your students in learning. Research shows that regular movement activities such as these have been shown to increase focus and retention in both students and in adults. And if you look in the back of your agenda, there is a little rainbow that you can just write down some of the notes that we're taking, so feel free to do that. We're here representing the Oswego City School District, which is a small urban district in Oswego County. We're serving the students in the city of Oswego, as well as the towns of Oswego, Manetto, and Scriba. We have 5 elementary schools, 1 middle school, and a high school. The majority, or 91% of our population, is white, and our student population is approximately 3,842 students. For the 2013-14 school year, the economic status of our population was divided almost evenly, where you can see 49% of our population was considered economically disadvantaged. This identification is based on federal guidelines, as well as those families or students that are participating in economic assistance programs that you see listed here. Most of the students are participating in free and reduced lunch, but they could participate in any of the other programs listed. Focusing on our elementary schools, you can see that the school populations vary, but what's most important to notice is that each school is showing an increase in the economically disadvantaged populations. Approximately 140 students in our district are considered homeless. About 50 of those are of elementary school age. This is based on the McKinney-Vento Homeless Education Assistance Act. That identifies students as homeless based on the fact that they're lacking a fixed, regular, or adequate nighttime residence. Our district, in affiliation with Oswego County Opportunities, is meeting the needs of those students as well as their families. The concern in our district, however, is not the amount of economically disadvantaged students, but how they are achieving on assessments. You can see here when you look at our subgroup, the economically disadvantaged, and the red subgroup, the non-economically disadvantaged, the disparity between the two groups over the years of 2012 through 2014. Similar findings are shown with our district math assessments. You can see again the disparity between the groups, and the economically disadvantaged group, those scoring at a level 3 or 4, are actually performing 1/3 to 1/2 less than the non-economically disadvantaged students. The trend is also continuing to grow in disparity between those groups over the years. Our district graduation rate is another concern. Title I high schools with the lowest graduation rate for subgroups have been identified as focus schools. Our graduation growth for the years 2009-10 to 2011 and 12 have identified us as a focus group for economically disadvantaged students. And as you can see, the economically disadvantaged group, in comparison to the all-student group, is significantly lower. So how can we help build a brighter future for those students and increase our graduation rates? We're working to combat the disparity between the economically disadvantaged and all students' achievement levels. Our goal is to build educator awareness about positive learning, increase student engagement in the classrooms in order to have a brighter future for all of our students. And learning about the views of our elementary grade teachers was the starting point for this process?
We surveyed the Oswego City School District through an electronic survey. It was sent to the elementary faculty and staff. We wanted to find out what the level of awareness was of poverty within our district, how our faculty and staff believe that poverty affects student achievement, whether they feel that they have the tools and strategies to effectively teach students of poverty, as well as any professional development opportunities that have been taken. We had 90 participants from a variety of grade levels, areas, and departments that participated in this survey. We found that 76% of the participants feel that poverty has significantly increased within our district in the past 5 years. We also asked them what they believe the percentage of economically disadvantaged students was in their particular building. Their responses were, on average, very similar to the actual percentages. And all but one of the respondents believe that student achievement is affected by poverty.
Over half the teachers at the elementary level who responded said that they believe the graduation rate for economically disadvantaged students was between 41 and 68%. That actually ended up being a corrected assumption, as the graduation rate over the past 3 years, as Gretchen mentioned, was 49, 55, and then 46% respectively. Nearly 60% of those teachers stated that resources to address poverty-related needs of students were only somewhat adequate, which indicates a need for those resources in our district. Nearly 57% indicated that they had had some professional development on teaching students in poverty, but when we followed up asking them to name the professional development that they had had, some said Eric Jensen's Teaching with Poverty in Mind, and the other half said Ruby Payne's Framework for Understanding Poverty. So the 57% that replied they had had PD can be a little misleading, as both of those were only professional development offered for 1 day in our district. And nearly all the respondents said that they would attend professional development on instructional strategies to support students in poverty. So this indicates a real need and a desire in our district to learn these strategies for our students.
So to begin, we wanted to just discuss basic poverty awareness as an important starting point for our educators. Poverty can be complex and it means different things to different people. We turn to Eric Jensen, an educational expert on brain research, poverty and learning. He's written several books to help build educator awareness. So we'll begin with his definition about poverty. If you look at your agenda, in the top portion, you will see this definition provided. We'd like to begin with a little brain brightener activity and have you try to complete the closed definition and then take a moment to share your thoughts with an elbow partner next to you. So you can just take a look. It matches the one on the screen. And feel free to talk to the person next to you if your stuff. Okay, so hopefully you had some time to figure out most, if not all, of the words. And according to Eric Jensen, poverty is a chronic and debilitating condition that results from multiple adverse synergistic risk factors and affects the mind, body, and soul. So we'd like to thank you for participating in our closed elbow engagement activity. At the beginning of our process for this analysis, we discussed what terms to use when writing and speaking about poverty in students. William Parrott writes about this in his Turning High Poverty Schools into High-Performing Schools. Many of the commonly used terms that he found in the book and that you may consider using when you're speaking of students with poverty are listed here. But his main point is the fact that they are just students. And unfortunately, they're students that are coming from homes with low income or socioeconomic status, but that doesn't have to be their future. In addition, we turn to Paul Dvorsky, founder of Ed Change, and an author who's educating others about equity and social justice. He had a powerful statement, which is, there's no such thing as a culture of poverty. So we want educators to be aware of some of the myths that we may actually have that aren't actually true. He writes about the fact that some myths are poor people are unmotivated or they lack work ethic. Poor people abuse drugs and alcohol, or maybe that they're not involved in their children's education. Differences in the values and beliefs among poor people are just as great as those between poor and wealthy people. So we challenge you to think about your biases and small stereotypes, and without building our awareness, educators could actually be causing students to fulfill these expectations. So, to do things differently, we need to understand that poverty affects children's lives as well as their brain development.
We've all heard of brain-based learning, but in order to fully understand how we learn, we must take a trip inside our brain. And the brain will be passed. Our brain is very squishy. It's made up of 78 to 80% water, 10 to 14% fat, and 8% protein. As you can see from this diagram, stimulation is very important to our brains. The more stimulation that occurs, the more nerve cells are connected, producing more neurons. This whole process is called neurogenesis. The brain is divided into 4 lobes: the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, the occipital lobe, and the temporal lobe. The frontal lobe controls executive functions such as thinking and planning, organizing and problem solving, controlling our emotions and our behaviors, as well as our personalities. The parietal lobe controls our perception, as well as making sense of the world. Our occipital lobe is our visual processing center. And finally, the temporal lobe controls our short and long-term memory, as well as our ability to understand language. Today, we're going to focus in on 3 parts of the brain within these lobes: the prefrontal cortex, the amygdala, and the hippocampus. The prefrontal cortex is in the frontal lobe behind the forehead. This is the area that controls those executive functions, regulating our thoughts, emotions, and actions. This area can easily be changed by the chemicals due to chronic stress. The amygdala is located in the temporal lobe. It's associated with the emotional responses such as fear. This is the part of the brain that if you're in a dark alley and you hear a noise, it'll react. It often is associated with the freeze, fight, or flight response. The hippocampus is also located in the temporal lobe, and is the center of short-term memory. However, over time, the hippocampus organizes and distributes those memories to other areas of the brain for long-term storage. Research shows that the first 1,000 days are crucial to brain development. The 3 key factors that can either develop or deprive a brain are nourishment,
A new study suggests our economic destiny may be determined by the time we are 12, because poverty can affect the brain. Martha Farah is the founder and director of the Center for Neuroscience and Society at the University of Pennsylvania. She has often wondered, why do poor children perform worse on IQ tests and in school?
Many different disciplines have tried to understand how it is that poverty shapes people's life chances. My colleagues and I are taking a neurobiological approach to this question.
Over the past few years, Martha and her colleagues have scanned the brain architecture of hundreds of children from a wide range of socioeconomic backgrounds. She has found there are physical differences between the brains of the rich and the poor.
The question we asked was, what parts of the brain are dependent on that socioeconomic status for the size and shape that they eventually grow to? What we found is that several important areas do show an effect of socioeconomic status.
Growing up in extreme poverty slows the growth of the hippocampus, which is important for learning, memory, and stress regulation. And it also shrinks the prefrontal cortex, which helps coordinate memory, perception, and motor control. Rich kids tend to have a thicker cortex than poor kids. But it is crucial to note the rich and poor aren't born with these differences. The brains of the poor start off the same as anyone else's. Their brains are, however, at greater risk of developing slowly in early childhood. It is not genetics that does the damage. It is lack of mental stimulation and the stresses of poverty.
One difference we know exists between the childhood experiences of poor kids and wealthier kids is that the wealthier kids get more cognitive stimulation. Everything from being read to, just being talked to, conversation, visits to interesting places, and we know that that promotes cognitive and brain development.
The next part of our presentation will connect our goal of building educational awareness about poverty and student engagement. According to Jensen, there are 7 differences that show up at school between low-income and middle-class people. Children from poverty are more likely to struggle with engagement for 7 different reasons. By understanding these differences and how to address them, teachers can help alleviate some of the negative effects of poverty. We will be discussing these 7 differences as well as offering some engagement activities and movement activities. It is our hope that you will learn how to understand poverty in a totally new way and learn how to intervene in positive, practical, and research-based ways. The first one we're going to talk about is cognition. Cognition is the process of thinking. Students who struggle with cognitive skills often act out or shut down. The good news is that cognitive capacity and intelligence are teachable skills. Students of poverty often show cognitive problems such as short attention spans, and difficulty in problem solving. Now, Eric Jensen offers 5 actions to build cognitive capacity. You're going to help me share these 5 actions. So this side of the room, I'm going to split this table right up. This side of the room is going to be red. And this side of the room is going to be blue. We're going to do a choral reading. So if you're in red, you're going to read the lines that are up there in red, and the blue will be reading the blue. So we're going to start with number 1, with the red side. Go ahead.
Build attention skills. Teach problem solving and critical thinking. Develop processing speed. Foster self-control. Train working memory.
Thank you for participating in the color-coded choral reading. you to switch this I to an L. Okay, now see if you can do that back and forth. See how quickly that brain can work. You gotta use both the neurons going on both sides of the body. This is a way to increase that brain power and get those neurons firing. Thank you for participating in our brain training working memory. All right, thumbs up if the answer to this question is yes. Thumbs down if the answer is no. Did you know exercise can improve academic achievement? The video that you're going to see is going to discuss the importance of exercise and how it can improve kids' academic performance.
A study from the U.S. Institute of Medicine shows that schools like Lincoln Elementary are actually helping students academically. Professor Harold Cole led the study.
The evidence is really emerging in the last 5 or 6 years, both cognitive studies as well as brain imaging studies and others, that show that the effects, the acute effects of a bout or two of physical activity on blood perfusion in the brain, in the centers that really help children learn, recall things faster, think faster, and actually are more likely to achieve their full academic potential compared to children who are not physically active.
Another study from the University of Illinois shows similar results. Professor Charles Hillman spoke via Skype.
We find that following a bout of walking, children have higher academic achievement scores in reading and mathematics.
Hillman says children in his study who had regular physical activity did better academically, but he also says when teachers build physical activity into the classroom or get children to exercise before class, they are then at their peak for learning. Carol Pearson, via.
So as you can see from this video, there's many benefits to exercise. Nerve cells grow, it improves memory, and it can improve and boost decision making. The next thing we're going to see is a brain scan, and it's going to show the difference between the brain of a student who is sitting and a brain of a student who's just got done doing 20 minutes of walking. When you see the brain scans, or into transition, get the kids up, move quickly, and get them back to their seats. This is the slide that I was talking about earlier. This is, on the right is somebody that just got done walking for 20 minutes, and I talked about the red area being where the neural activity is increased, and the blue, low neural activity. This is a student that's been sitting. So as you can see, after a 20-minute walk, how much the brain is ready and enhanced, ready for learning. It's a great thing to do before the state tests. Get them up, move for 20 minutes before they take their state test. And then we just did our brain study experiment.
The second reason students from low-income homes may perform differently is vocabulary. The child's vocabulary is part of the brain's toolkit for learning, memory, and cognition. University of Kansas researchers Betty Hart and Todd Risley sought to find out what happens in children's early experiences that actually account for intractable differences in rates of vocabulary growth that you can see here on the chart. They studied 42 families across the different incomes, and as shown on the chart, the disparity across the incomes in relationship to words per hour, words heard by age 4, words in vocabulary, and affirmations and coefficients was staggering. As the income decreases, so did all the numbers of words in each of those categories. And they published their findings in a book, Meaningful Differences. The children in the study all began at the same starting point, but the difference in the number of words heard by age 4 between the low and high income children is now known as the 30 million word gap, which sounds huge. Follow-up assessments of these children aged 10 showed that that early vocabulary gap was a strong predictor of future language skills by 3rd grade. So what can teachers do to close that 30 million word gap? Please scan the 5 principles here that you can see on the screen to build oral vocabulary. These are the principles that were identified by Susan Newman and Tanya Wright, who've studied, taught, and written about early literacy development. They've analyzed data from their own studies as well as 75 other vocabulary studies. E.V. Hirsch Jr. is the founder of Core Knowledge Foundation. And he states that if we want to reduce economic inequality in America, a good place to start is the language arts classroom. That's exactly what the K-2 teachers are already doing in our district. We're utilizing the Core Knowledge Language Arts program that follows this belief. And as a 1st grade teacher, I can verify a lot of those principles that were shared on the earlier slide are utilized in this program. But if you're not using that program, there is another daily activity that you can do called College Talk. And we're going to watch a video that will briefly explain how you can bring vocabulary into your daily classroom. And when we are finished, we'll do another brain break activity. So watch carefully. Some of the words will be part of your activity.
A tip that I use in my classroom is what I refer to as college talk. I just thought of the most common phrases that we use in the classroom, such as stop talking, take out your book, I need you to focus and pay attention, this is important. And I just developed more higher level or college talk for saying those very same phrases. For example, stop talking, I used stop socializing, or we're being very garrulous. When I'm saying I need to tell you something very important, I'll say I have an imperative announcement. This is very critical for you. So in the beginning, of course, the kids are very confused. They look at each other and they're like, what did she say? What is she saying? And I explain it once or twice, but I think the constant repetition of using the same phrase over and over, they get it. So now when I go up to my kids and I say, what do you think is the situation? What am I upset about? And instead of saying we're talking too much, they'll really say we're socializing or we're being garrulous and it's interrupting the learning. So it's very exciting to me.
Okay, so while the video is on, we passed out some vocabulary cards. Our next brain brightener is going to be called Vocabulary Mix and Mingle. two other people that have a synonym for your word. So your word will match two of their two other people in the classroom. And then you can, if you have time, share your word, discuss it, use it in a sentence, or how you saw it used in the video. Any questions about our vocabulary mix and mingle? Okay, great. So please stand up, wander around, see if you can find two other people that would match your word. Partners in crime. Sort of. Oh, there we looks like everybody's in groups of three, so I will put the words up that hopefully you found specifically partners too. So if you found your group of three, give your group a high five and say thanks for partnering. You can keep the cards if you'd like. And we'd like to thank you for participating in our vocabulary activity.
The third difference that we as educators need to be aware of when teaching students of poverty is effort. It's not unusual to see economically disadvantaged students slouching in their seat or disengaged. This I give up posture is a symptom of stress and depression. Everyone, regardless of socioeconomic status, feels unmotivated at one point or another. But it doesn't mean that they're unmotivated people. It simply means that they are in an unmotivated environment, in an unmotivated mind-body state. Students are temporarily unmotivated for three different reasons. The first, they might be shielding themselves from being put into a similar situation in which they failed in the past, even though they put forth all of their effort. Environmental factors such as unsuitable learning style, bad seating, a lack of resources, fear of embarrassment, fear of failure, or lack of hope also contribute to a lack of effort. And when students lack hope and optimism, they don't view their future in a positive way. The primary factor in motivating students is the teacher and school environment. Effort can be encouraged or disencouraged by the actions of the important people in students' lives. Students will put forth more effort when they can connect the actions to an outcome. When they hear real-world success stories, especially those of people coming from poverty. When they feel competent. When they think that the learning is fun and engaging. Where they have some control over the task and they can make connections to the real world. Students naturally want to avoid being teased by their peers, so therefore they must trust that their parent or their teacher or their peers will never humiliate them, never criticize them, and never use sarcasm. Therefore, they will put forth more effort when the risk is low. To achieve this, teachers need to manage the risk level within the classroom. This can be done by creating a safe and respectful environment, smiling and making eye contact at each and every student every day, building positive relationships with all students, acknowledge and thank students for participating and contributing an answer regardless of it being correct or incorrect, and allowing students to create some of the rules for participating in discussions and activities. Other strategies that help reduce the risk level are providing adequate wait time when answering questions, incorporating academic games and cooperative group activities, as well as asking more inclusive questions rather than exclusive questions. Exclusive questions automatically exclude a large portion of the class, and that's going to increase their risk, their sense of risk, and sense of alienation. Nearly every student will be able to answer an inclusive question. So our next brain brightener is going to be voting with our feet. I example of an exclusive question, you are going to move to your left. If it is an example of an inclusive question in which all students can relate to, you will move to your right. So I'd ask for you to stand and push your chair in. And the first one is, who here has ever had the opportunity to travel outside our state? Not answering the question, just if it's an exclusive, you would move to the left. If it's an inclusive question, move to the right.
Yeah, just a couple steps.
Yes, this is exclusive because not every child has had that opportunity. Next question. How many of you would someday like to travel to other states or other countries? This is inclusive. Many students would have the desire to travel somewhere else someday. Raise your hand if you've been to the local science museum. So if this is an example of exclusive, move to the left. Yes. That's right. Not every child has been to the science museum. And our last question. Raise your hand if you've ever seen something that just blew your mind. And that is inclusive because every child will be able to relate to that in some way or another. All right, thank you for participating and vote for with your feet. You may take a seat. The fourth difference that we as educators need to be aware of when teaching students of poverty is hope and mindset. Hope occurs when students see optimistic, believable outcomes of a better future. It improves the brain chemicals, which increases their mood and persistence. Students living in poverty associate being poor with lowered expectations about their future. They believe that their future has more negative events than positive events. They also believe that they're going to fail anyway, so they don't want to bother putting forth the effort. And they believe that the only way to reach success is by being smart. Eric Jensen states, students living in poverty have had enough negatives. What they need is real, persistent hope. To increase hope, educators need to say things like, when you graduate, not if you graduate. Or with an extra hour of effort, you should be able to finish that off. Educators should also tell students why they can succeed and reinforce their dreams. Carol Dweck, researcher of Stanford University and author of the book Mindset, is well known for her work on the two mindsets and how they affect student performance. She defines mindset as an established set of attitudes and beliefs that a person holds on to. Most people are not held back by their ability, but rather by their mindset. Mindsets bring success, not just abilities and talents. And remember, our brains can change, therefore our mindsets can change as well. A child with a fixed mindset will believe that they are born with their intelligence and their talents. They are afraid of not being smart, and they want to be seen as talented. These characteristics listed on the board lead to a very emotional child whose goal is to look smart, not dumb. A child with a growth mindset believes that their ability can be developed. The qualities listed show that success is about learning and developing themselves. And these characteristics lead to a hardworking, open-minded student. Students living in poverty tend to have a fixed mindset, which hinders their ability to learn, grow, and develop new skills. The ability to change from one mindset to another can and should be taught to all children. They need help developing this growth mindset, though. This can be done by focusing on their attitude, their effort, their commitment, and different strategies. This allows them to feel hopeful and that the end point is possible, which in turn leads to increased motivation, better grades, and higher achievement test scores. One way to develop a growth mindset is through praise. Children love praise, but the kind of praise given greatly affects the mindset and efforts of that student. For over a decade, Carol Dweck and her research team studied study included a variety of experiments on 400 fifth grade students from all over the country. All students were given an easy IQ test. They split the students into two groups. The group that was praised by their intelligence were told, you must be smart at this. The other group that was praised for their effort were told, you must have worked hard. Both groups were then given an option for their second test. The first option was a harder version in which they had a great opportunity to learn and grow. But the second option was an easy version in which they would all succeed. 67% of the group that was praised for their intelligence chose the easier option. 92% of the group that was praised for their effort chose the harder option. So then for the third test, they were all given an impossible test. Carol and her research team knew that the students weren't going to pass this, but they wanted to see how they would tackle it. The group that was praised for their effort worked harder, longer, and enjoyed the task more. Whereas the group that was praised for their intelligence became frustrated and gave up very easily. So then the fourth and final test was as easy as the very first IQ test. And the group that was praised for their intelligence actually dropped by 20% on average. Whereas the group that was praised for their effort had an overall average or increase of 30%. That's a 50% gap in performance based on a few subtle differences in the way that they were praised. So therefore, as educators, we need to remember to praise students for the process and the effort that they put in, not for their intelligence and abilities. Another way for teachers to help develop growth mindsets is to teach students that their own words can change their mindsets. Students must understand that their brain believes what they tell it. This next brain brightener shares some examples of fixed statements and fixed and growth mind statements that students might use within the classroom. So when I share a statement, if it's a fixed statement, then you will stay fixed in your seat. If it is an example of a growth-minded statement, then you will stand up. Okay? So the first statement is, this is hard. So if you think this is a fixed-minded statement, stay seated. If you think it's growth-minded, stand. This is fixed. This will take some time and effort. Growth. Okay, you may sit. I'm going to figure out how she does it so I can try it. That is growth. You may sit. She's so smart, I'll never be that smart. That is fixed. Plan A didn't work. And that is fixed. Good thing the alphabet has 25 more letters. And that is growth-minded. Is this really my best work? Growth-minded. And the last one. It's good enough. That is fixed. Thank you for participating in the Second Stand Growth Brightener activity.
So we're up to the fifth difference of what we need to be aware of when teaching students in poverty, and that is building relationships. A child's developing brain often becomes stressed when faced with early life experiences that are chaotic or when one or both parents are absent. 75% of children from poverty have only a single caregiver. In poverty homes, children are reprimanded twice as much as they are given any positive comments, while their peers in middle-class homes receive 3 times as much praise as any negative comments. Caregivers who are stressed about life necessities like food, housing, and bills might be angry and even less likely to give any positive comments at all. Relationships can be challenging or entrusting for children in poverty as they lack necessary role models and sufficient stable supports. Disruptive or unreliable relationships at home often result in mistrust in students in our classrooms. These children have been failed by adults at home, and they may assume that the adults at school are going to fail them as well. They're more act disrespectful, behave impulsively, and use inappropriate language. Fortunately, there are specific practices and strategies that we can use to ensure that we're building and maintaining positive relationships with our students in poverty. The first might sound a little bit harsh, but establishing appropriate levels of dominance really just means the teacher's ability to provide clear purpose and strong guidance in academics and behavior. Teachers can exhibit appropriate levels of dominance by establishing clear behavioral expectations and consequences. And ideally, these rules and consequences should be decided upon mutually by the teacher and the students. They should also establish clear learning goals, and they should continually revisit and revise those goals with students throughout the year. And in addition, teachers should exhibit assertive behavior. They should use assertive body language, appropriate tone of voice, and address behavior issues as they pop up and not wait to handle them. Students in a classroom like this get the clear impression that the teacher has very clear behavior expectations about what's going to go on. Another strategy is building appropriate levels of cooperation. And what this means is just the need and concern for the needs and opinions of others. And it focuses on the teachers and students working together as a team. Some ways to do this are to ask students what they would like to learn, allow them to set some of their own learning objectives, involving their interests in what's going on in the classroom, allowing them some choice, and possibly most importantly, taking a personal interest in each and every student in the classroom. Teachers' physical actions are interpreted by students as indication of their mood and their attitude toward the students. There are many practices that emphasize equity and positive classroom interaction. Teachers should consciously practice and engage in things such as easy things like smiling at students, making eye contact with them, deliberately moving toward them and standing next to each one during the class period, and allowing and encouraging all of them to participate regardless of successes and failures in the past, how they've performed in the past. Additionally, we need to have an awareness of high-need students in the classroom. School might be the only place where students who face severe challenges or who have come from poverty can get their needs met. The reality of school today is that classroom teachers are often faced with a myriad of students with these high needs, although we're not always the experts in dealing with them. For example, students who are passive, aggressive, have attention problems, or considered socially inept. Researchers studying classroom strategies of effective teachers looked at how teachers dealt with specific types of students. And they found that the most effective teachers didn't employ a one-size-fits-all approach. Of course, they utilized different strategies with different types of students based on their needs. For example, for students who are passive, they provided a safe interaction and withheld criticism. For your aggressive students, be consistent and provide immediate rewards and consequences. Students with attention problems, teach basic concentration skills and provide a quiet workplace. For those students who might be socially inept, teach them the meaning of facial expressions and appropriate physical distance from others. And use humor when appropriate is another strategy for building relationships. Teachers can impart concern and cooperation through humor. It comes naturally to some as part of their personality, but even if humor isn't intrinsic, there are a few simple things that you can do, like keep a book of jokes handy, laugh at yourself in the classroom, and laugh with your students. Teachers need to communicate an appropriate level of guidance and control. And one way to do this is to convey a sense of emotional objectivity. This doesn't mean you display no emotion, rather you provide a consistent tone for the classroom. There are several aspects of emotional objectivity. One is that realizing that humans are emotional by nature. Teachers can't always be expected to be fond of every student in our classroom, but we need to conduct ourselves in ways that shows the appropriate level of concern and care for all of the students in the classroom. When a teacher finds she has negative emotions associated with a student, she should spend some time to try to figure out what are the characteristics When asked if a student had completed his homework the night before, he has an angry outburst. Use a reframing technique. Imagine that he's not trying to challenge your authority or disrupt the class, but maybe he's stuck on a fight that he had with his parents the night before, or there's some other valid reason why the homework didn't get completed. So it allows for some emotional objectivity and some unbiased thinking, and that'll result in more positive relationships with students. Maintain a cool exterior. In order to maintain emotional objectivity, a teacher must always avoid extremes, especially when feeling angry with a student. Resist the urge to exhibit that emotion. Never point a finger or shake a fist, raise the tone of voice, glare or stare, or move toward or hover over the student, or ridicule. Instead, speak directly to the student in a calm and respectful tone. Look directly, but without glaring or staring. Maintain an appropriate distance, and have a facial expression that's either neutral or positive. And of course, we've all heard praise in public and correct in private. Okay, we're going to get our brains ready and re-engaged for our next part of our presentation. So when I say go, I would like you to please pound the table 3 times, stomp your foot twice, and turn to your nearest partner and give them a compliment about your listening. Go.
workshop will consist of the brain-based learning that was introduced tonight and the 7 effects of poverty. They'll have those professional developments and workshops all throughout the year. We like to bring in some book studies, some of the authors that you've heard tonight, Eric Jensen and Carol Dweck, in. And we also want to provide videos and articles throughout the year to be shared with all staff members. And our next idea was to bring in guest speakers to deliver poverty awareness to all faculty and staff at the elementary level. Year 2 plan, we're calling it Implementing Engagement Strategies. We'd like to kick off year 2 with the Eric Jensen visit. Our key term trainers will begin to introduce the brain-breaking strategies, some that we have listed up here on our beautiful rainbow, throughout the school year. Our key term trainers will also continue to provide professional development throughout the year with the brain-based learning, the 7 effects, and the engagement tools of what you can use in the classroom. We'll also continue to offer book studies, and monthly videos and articles will be shared with all staff members as well. To end year 2, we'd like to engage all teachers in a survey where we can collect the data and see where we need to go for year 3. But with our recommendations comes a budget.
Well, Mr. Halsey, our first issue analysis, we didn't require any budget. But we do have a budget for this one, and it's a 2-year plan budget. The first of 4 parts would be travel and lodging, book study books, speakers, and professional development. Professional development funds already are set aside each year, so the grand total will be about $38,500. And note at the bottom, there are Title IIA grant money and school improvement grant funds out there that can offset this cost. Now moving forward, we have the old way where we teach the same content, you repeat, you lecture, and you'll get students that look like this. Or we have the new, exciting, smarter way, where there's buy-in from the students, there's engagement and feedback, and you will see it's engaged. We'd like to thank all of these people up on here for all the support they gave us during this issue analysis, and we'd like to thank each and every one of you for being an engaged learner today. And if you could turn to your neighbor and say, brains can change.
Brains can change.